This episode is brought to you by TherapyNotes. You can check them out by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. They're the leading electronic health record system for private practices. And they're who I use in my practice and couldn't do without them. So be sure and check them out, therapynotes.com. Hello, I'm Gordon Brewer, and welcome to the Practice of Therapy podcast, where we explore the business and clinical sides of running a private practice. Well, hello everyone. This is episode number 231 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. I'm Gordon Brewer. Glad you joined me for this very special episode. In the last few weeks, I've had a conversation with my good friend, Dr. David Hall, and we were just talking about podcasting and throwing around some ideas. And he planted this idea in my head of doing some throwback episodes. One of the things about this podcast that's still hard for me to get my head around is that I've been doing this since 2017. And so I've got a lot of episodes under the belt. And for those of you that might be newer to the podcast or just discovering, I would invite you to go back and listen to some older episodes. But in this particular episode, I'm doing a throwback. And what makes this also very special is that we're going back all the way to episode number 7 for you to hear my interview with late Roy Huggins. And Roy was the person behind Person-Centered Tech, which Person-Centered Tech is still going, but unfortunately we lost Roy in November of 2021. And so in many ways, this is my way, a small way of kind of honoring him and honoring his legacy and all that he has contributed to our profession. I know that his wife, Electra, and his team are still working hard with Person-Centered Tech, which really is one of the best resources I know of for the tech side of private practice. And Roy was just really kind of my go-to person, one of my go-to people for learning about the tech side of private practice. The other person that I'll have to do a little quick shout out here because Roy's story and my friend Rob Reinhardt's story intersect a lot because Roy and Rob were doing a podcast called Therapy Tech, and they immediately thought of Rob when I found out of Roy's passing, but was having a conversation with Rob here recently, just remembering Roy and just his wicked sense of humor and his dry sarcasm, which was never malicious in any way, but Roy was just a gem of a person. And so I'm looking forward to you hearing this interview. And Roy and I talk about in this interview about Hipaa and the financial side of your business and some great wisdom that is still true today, even though it's been, oh my gosh, how many years now? Almost 5 years since I interviewed Roy for the Practice of Therapy. But anyway, looking forward to you hearing this throwback episode and getting to hear again my interview with Roy Huggins. And also, before we get to my interview with Roy, I'd love for you to hear from you what you would like to get more of from the Practice of Therapy. And, I think one of the things that's really always important when you're in a space like this is to check in with people and just see what is it that they need, what is it they're looking for, what are the resources that you're wanting, and how we can be of support here at the Practice of Therapy. And so if you'll go over to practiceoftherapy.com/survey and just take this very short survey, and I promise it's very short, it'll only take you just a few minutes to do, that will let me know what you're needing and how I can better serve you and really start pulling more and more resources together, because I think that is something that we're all needing. We're all looking for ways to do different stuff. So anyway, be sure and check that out. And also while you're over there at practiceoftherapy.com, be sure and check out our resources, in particular the free webinars that we've got out right now. Gotten a lot of requests for more and more free resources, and I get a lot of comments around that. But we've got the webinars that are out now that are automated webinars, and you pick the time that you want to participate in the webinar. So go to practiceoftherapy.com/webinars to find out more about what we have what our offerings are there. So before we get to my interview with Roy, I'd love for you to hear from our sponsor of the podcast, TherapyNotes.
As your practice grows, the systems and processes you have in place will keep your practice running smoothly. That is why it is important to have an electronic health record system that is specific to mental health providers. TherapyNotes is a complete practice management system with everything you need to manage patient records, schedule appointments, meet with patients remotely, create rich documentation, and bill insurance right at your fingertips. Their streamlined software is accessible wherever and whenever you need it. They are who Gordon uses in his practice. And did I mention that they are one of the top-rated EHRs for mental health private practices? Their support is also second to none. Be sure to check them out at practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. Be sure to use the promo code GORDON to get 2 months free.
I'm so happy to have Roy Huggins with me today. Roy, for those of you that don't know about Roy, you really need to find out about Roy. Roy is the he is the ultimate guru when it comes to tech and counseling and private practice and any sort of mental health counseling. He's my go-to person. Roy is the person behind Person-Centered Tech, and I'll get Roy to tell us more about that. But Roy is a licensed professional counselor with an NCC designation. He before going into the mental health field, he was a web developer and was trained in all things tech. He is an instructor and advisor in several different capacities. He's affiliated with the Zur Institute. He teaches ethics at Portland State University in their counseling program. He's been an advisor for several different boards and licensing agencies. And wow, Roy, glad you're with me today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I know that I have always worried about when I went into private practice or made the transition into private practice was doing things right, but also the big green monster out there we call Hipaa. And I think, although it's, I shouldn't have such a negative spin on Hipaa, but I think for a lot of people it's very intimidating. But tell us about your private practice journey and how you gotten to be where you are, and kind of a little more about yourself and some stuff that you would want people to know.
Yeah, the good. I'm glad you asked about the private practice journey part, because that tells us a little bit about how it came to understand Hipaa and why it's actually not as scary as it should be, right?
Right.
I was a web developer before grad school, and I was a contractor. I was independent, so I've actually been self-employed since I finished college, except for the brief, the 3-year stint when I taught in Japan. I was employed by them, of course, but that's the only time I've been an employee. And other than teaching, the part-time, like teaching at PSU, for example. So for me, private practice, the business side was like natural. It was like, of course, you got to go into private practice. That's what I always have done, right? And that made a huge difference. And one thing, part of my journey to consulting has been learning, kind of understanding how not everyone has the business outlook I do, for example. And that's been very important because private practice is certainly available to all of us, but some of us are not built for are not naturally inclined towards business. And that's something that I had to recognize, because I really need to be able to help people with that. Right. Even if I'm just helping them with Hipaa, I still need to help them understand the business aspect of that.
Yes, yes.
So for me, I got back from Japan. It's time to start my private practice. The business side's easy for me, so that's faster. But, and of course, I have a fantastic supervisor at the time, and he was extremely helpful and supportive. So a lot of things went well, because partly just my background, partly just I got lucky. I had a great advisor and great peers to help me through it. Portland's a good town to go into private practice in. Lots of Portlanders love their therapy. It's not hard to get clients here. It may be hard to get wealthy here. Not impossible, but certainly you can live on a private practice here and get lots of clients. It's very easy to make that kind of practice here.
Yeah, Portland is definitely on my bucket list to come to. I've not been to that part of the country yet.
Yeah, it's obviously it's beautiful here. You're in. I want to guess you're in North Carolina.
I'm in Tennessee.
Tennessee, I knew that. Totally knew that.
Northeast Tennessee. Yeah, beautiful place here too. Appalachian
that is
mountains.
Also a gorgeous place. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, tell us too about person-centered tech and how you got that started and the purpose behind that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it does relate to the private practice journey, because essentially what happened was one of my first clients, and of course we have the situation where I'm charging peanuts because I'm more concerned about getting my hours to finish my license. And so of course what happens is the people who need the most expert counseling go to the newest counselor. Right.
Yes.
And which is, I think, a big problem we have, because these are people who are falling through the cracks in public services. So they end up going to outpatient private practice, but really need a lot of help. Luckily, these days in Oregon, that's a lot better than it was when I started. But they're still wonderful people I wanted to help. And one is a young woman who I diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, who was just in an immense amount of pain all the time. And she, really couldn't communicate in my office, and I wasn't good enough yet at all of this to really understand it. And that's the too bad. I mean, I think I helped her, but in the way that a caring person does, not an expert at helping somebody with that kind of disorder. But I think I did, I think I did okay, but could have done better, but I was new. But the important thing was, she would not really be able to talk about what she wanted to talk about in session, but she could text me.
Wow.
Right. And she'd text me like enormously long messages that are actually really just what I was asking her to talk about in the session.
Wow.
And she'd do it on a flip phone. This is, smartphones are still new. I didn't have one. I did have one, but I was kind of, it's because I was like, ooh, I love smartphones. And, she'd be doing the boop, 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 at lightning speed. Like, that's like her comfort item. And I asked her about it, and she's like, I can't sit here across from you and like talk about the inner hell.
Yeah.
Right. But my phone's great. It's my comfort item. I can do that. So one of the challenges for me, I mean, they're kind of, I knew enough to be self-dangerous because I knew enough about the internet and electronic transmissions and texting, having had that technical background, that I knew that this is the confidentiality risks involved. And of course, coming from just the ethical perspective, it was if there's a confidentiality breach, a disclosure, that's unethical. That's all there is to it. And I was like, this has to be unethical.
Right.
But is it really ethical if I don't let her do what helps her get better?
Yes.
And that's when I started to study it. And that's basically, in a nutshell, the rest is, how person-centered tech came to be.
Wow. That's a great. I had read up a little bit about how I didn't know that story, hadn't heard that story. One of the things too I wanted to mention is that you and Rob Reinhardt also started a podcast, and I've been listening to it, and it's Therapy Tech, I believe, is the name of the podcast.
Therapy Tech with Rob and Roy. Yep.
Yeah, and it's really great stuff, and I'm looking forward to what's coming down the road with that. Covering everything tech so far.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And every episode we only do it once a month because each episode is meant to be kind of a deep resource.
Yes.
Right. So,
yes.
So it's really fun to do.
Yeah. So if someone were to were going into private practice, maybe they're working for an agency or thinking about delving into it, what are I know this is going to be a very broad topic, but what things would they need to know about on the tech side of things in terms of, how to set up their computer? And, I know you're a big fan of G Suite and Google, and just being able, because it's something that we can use that's HIPAA secure. And here's something I'm going to point out that I learned from Roy. Saying HIPAA compliant is really not a very good descriptive way of saying things.
Yeah. About a product.
Yeah. So, tell us something about that.
Oh, about the HIPAA compliant thing?
Yeah, the HIPAA compliant, HIPAA secure, and then also just, if somebody were new to this, what would they want to take into consideration and think about?
Yeah, I'll address the HIPAA compliant piece first, and then kind of get to the the tech list, because that's actually the topic of the first podcast with Rob, is just making our kind of checklist. I also have an article about it. Your show notes can be full of useful links, trust me. But the thing with HIPAA compliant, and I'm noticing more and more, finally, I'm starting to see people out there talking correctly about it, and it makes me so much happier, because you still see experts saying, this is stuff that like in 2010 when I started doing all this, you started seeing people, you saw people being like, oh, you should use a product that does a business associate agreement, which is accurate, of course, and they should claim to be HIPAA compliant. And I was like, after I really started to understand what it's about and see how that impacted people, it just makes me shudder every time, because what happens is when you say a product is HIPAA compliant, what happens is like let me just ask you, Gordon, if you see a little seal on the website, whether like a caduceus, and it says HIPAA compliant, what is the implied meaning of that to you? What does it make you think of about this product?
Well, it makes me think that I can use it, and I'm not going to have Big Brother breathing down my neck.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a really good way of putting it, right? Because that's what comes to your mind, right? It just takes it all off your mind, and you're fine. You don't worry about it. And something that you may not voice, but you may be thinking, is that it implies that there's probably some sort of either certification process or a checklist that the government releases that vendors can use to make sure they're compliant.
Right.
So like it's a safe harbor checklist. And it's not at all unreasonable for you to assume that when you see this, because that's true of a lot of other similar regulations. Right. Because there's, like PCI DSS, for example, which is it's not a law, it's an industry standard, but the industry actually does have certification programs for making products PCI DSS compliant certified, right? And that's a really normal thing you see out there. Like you look at your electronics and they'll say they're like FCC, they pass FCC regulations, and there's an actual certification for that, right? So like when you look at HIPAA compliance, there's nothing like that. It has zero meaning, or zero actual technical meaning. Right. Yeah. And so what happens is you get the feeling that use of the product requires no new efforts or new considerations on your own part, which is inaccurate. And you end up doing something non-compliant because you end up using the product in a non-compliant way. Right. Yeah, and I think it's, one of the things that was helpful for me in learning about this is just really understanding how the internet works. And I believe it was you I was listening to, maybe on with Joe Sanok on Practice of the Practice. Probably, right. Yeah, so I think is where I heard this. But it's almost like I like this analogy of, when you're sending something on the internet, it would be kind of like me going out the front door of my office, and I see somebody walking down the street, and I say, "Hey, are you going this way? Would you take this file folder in that direction?" And but don't look inside. But if you're taking it this way, would you? Could you take it down to the next person you see going where this is supposed to go? And so that was important. I think a good visual for me of thinking about that. So how can we protect ourselves and all of that, but really ultimately protect our clients. That's what it's all about. Well, the big thing, and it's kind of funny, you're asking about tech, and it's absolutely right to ask about tech, and it still comes back to that business piece, which I'm sure you talk about all the time because you know how important that is, right? Right. And the thing I'd say there that I encounter all the time is people don't, and this is a generic fact that just impacts the tech. And so we got to talk about it, which is that people going into the private practice don't give themselves enough financial or temporal time buffer to take care of the punches they got to roll with, right? Or to take care of, when things shift and change and they got to make a shift or a change. Like, when they suddenly realize that, if someone starts to get into the tech for their practice without thinking about the ethical implications or legal implications of what they're choosing, suddenly later they find themselves having to pivot, having already gone in one other direction. They got momentum going this way. Now you got to pivot another way. And so it's even harder at that point to change what you're doing. And it costs you time and money. And you haven't given yourself enough time and money to do that. And so suddenly you find that you're doing it wrong and you can't change it, and it feels terrible.
Right. That's and so I think it's all that more important to set it up right and really do your research on the front end to know how to set things up.
And also charge enough that you make more than you need.
Yes. I think that's you got to know your numbers. You really do. And I think that's something that and I think I know at least the way that I did it when I went into private practice, 10 years ago. I kind of worked backwards. I kind of said, okay, this is what I need to survive.
Totally.
And then just kind of work backwards from that and figured that out.
Good for you. What's your background? I mean, do you have a background in business?
What's interesting is I did work in another industry. I was a funeral director and I worked in the funeral business for years. And plus I worked in the nonprofit sector after that in the mental health field. But I learned a lot about business, believe it or not, working at the funeral home.
That makes sense, yeah.
But then also working in the nonprofit sector, and particularly when I was a supervisor and having to make budgets and all that sort of thing. So that was kind of how I learned it. And then, but as far as running a small business, I've had to learn a lot of stuff the hard way.
Oh, of course, yeah. But it's a big difference, as I'm sure you know, when you're consulting with people coming out of the agency, meaning coming out of employment life and the self-employment life.
Right.
Just knowing that basic idea of there's actually pretty simple math that doesn't require anything beyond what's on your basic calculator, right?
Yep.
That can actually help you. Like that can be like the miracle from heaven in terms of helping you figure out what you need, which is to just figure out how much money you need, add a little bit,
right,
and then divide by the number of clients you can work with,
right. And I would say also, like you alluded to earlier, is be sure from the get-go to start creating a financial buffer for yourself.
Exactly.
I would say put at least, in my way of thinking, put away at least 2 or 3 6 months or years, even better, worth of money that will support you if you didn't see a single client.
And that's not money, and that's not like in your savings. That's your buffer for living.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly. That's really important. I think a lot of our colleagues see that as greedy. Right? Like, because, let's back off on that and kind of look at it from that perspective. It makes perfect sense. Because, you want to get out there to help people, not to be rich or to be a money grubber or something along those lines. And that's definitely our social work colleagues. That's where they come from very much, even if they don't come from that personally, they sort of developed that sense as social workers. Right. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all. And neither of us is trying to tell someone to be greedy or money oriented. What we're trying to tell you is to do financial self-care.
Right.
The same way I tell you to do your yoga or whatever you need so that you're not burned out when you see your clients.
Right.
You have to see it the same way. Because if you don't, you will get burned out and you will not serve clients.
Yeah. You're exactly right. And that's I think self-care is something that sometimes gets put on the back burner, and I would say financial self-care as well.
Exactly.
Making sure that. So
okay, so back to tech, the thing I'm so good at.
So with tech, what I know you could probably spend hours just talking about things that people could need and tools they could use and that sort of thing. But obviously we've got to have a computer, but just pull a computer out of the box and start going to it. We need to do a little more than that.
Right. An Apple IIe is a good computer to start with because it's nice and actually I'm joking. The Apple IIe, it's from like 1981. I'm too nerdy of a joke.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
It's a bit heavy to carry around. And it's kind of funny is I might be like, do you really need a computer? And it's like, it is a bit hard to operate a practice that's going to use electronics at all without having a real computer, which can be a laptop or a desktop. Like some people, I've worked with some people who do everything with tablets, like iPads or Android tablets. And they are okay with that, but there's a lot of limitations. They just accept the limitations and work with them. But for most people, you want to have a real computer in addition to whatever handy mobile devices you have, because a real computer is necessary for the more heavy lifting work you might need to do, even if you only need to do it occasionally.
Right.
But there are definitely people who prefer to do their note taking and all their practice management system stuff on a tablet, and they like it works, and that's great. That's fine with me. But at some point, there's some feature you need to do or some task you need to do that can't be done on a tablet. That does happen, which is why I recommend people strongly consider getting a computer. And so at that point, we look at the fact that, you gave that analogy about the internet where you're handing a file folder to somebody and saying, hey, take this southeast and until you're not going southeast anymore, and then hand it to the next person who's going southeast until it makes its way to Miami, right?
Right.
And then so you're like, and don't look inside.
Yeah, right.
Right. So of course the thing we do on the internet to actually, instead of just saying don't look inside, which is what we used to do on the internet before about 1995, we just said don't look inside, is now what we do, because we can't trust that anymore, is we encrypt. And that means that you scramble the data. So like if you encrypted that folder, literally what it would mean is that you rewrite all the contents of the folder in a secret code. That's exactly the same thing. And I'm not even simplifying. I'm actually saying exactly what it is. Right. And encryption is that. It is no more complex than that. I really want everyone to know that. And so at that point, someone can look inside all they want and they see a secret code that they can't break, because encryption is easier to make than it is to break. Right. So this comes back to the computer thing, because if you're going to put any client information on your computer, you want it to be encrypted. Right. And so how does the encryption get unlocked? Well, it should be only your password that can unlock the encryption. That's the idea. And so people ask, okay, so how do I get encryption on my computer? What software do I use? That's the logical next question. And so this is where I specify that we don't actually mean you should just encrypt those files. We mean your computer should set itself up so that every single byte and whatever that goes onto the hard drive, every single thing it puts into its long-term memory, every single one should be encrypted before it gets put into the long-term memory, before it gets stored. Right. And we refer to that as encrypting your computer, even though that phrase is confusing because only information can be encrypted. A computer can't be encrypted, but it's OK. It's just a shorthand that we use to mean that the computer is set up so that it doesn't save anything at all, not even one bit, without encrypting it first.
Yes.
And so what that means is that if someone gets your computer, they can even like open it up and pull out the hard drive, and the information on it would be encrypted. So all their efforts would be for naught. They would be unable to see anything you do. And the beauty here is that HIPAA's breach notification rule, which is the rule that governs, like, if you have a security breach, what do you do? Right? That's the rule for that.
Right.
It actually has in it a safe harbor that says, if you do that thing I just described, which is called full disk encryption or full device encryption, the safe harbor states that when you do that, you can assume that a breach did not occur.
Yes.
Right. So that's the advantage. It's very cheap, very easy to give yourself this massive protection with that computer you use.
Right. So I know that it's done on differently on different devices, but where could someone get the information about how to do that?
Well, they can go to personcenteredtech.com.
And that's the place I would go.
Go up to free articles and down to the the HIPAA article series. We have 5 series of articles that give the educational introduction to these 5 topics. And it's for free. You can just read all of them. And if you want to sign up for our newsletter, we can actually email the articles to you in these sort of 2-week increments so that you can read them slowly over time, which some people prefer to do. But yeah, we have one of the articles in there is about that safe harbor in the HIPAA rule and how you encrypt your devices in order to do that. And it's really easy. The software you need for the Mac is built into it. For Windows, it's built in if you get the Pro version. Android phones, you just flip a switch. iPhones, you just set a strong passcode. It's all really actually very easy and inexpensive.
Yeah. So tell us more about passcodes and passwords. And you know, I know like with my iPhone, it recognizes my thumbprint, and and I remember, I can't remember exactly how you put it one time, but it was something like something you know, something you have.
Oh yes,
yeah. Okay,
you've been paying attention to everything I do.
Yeah, just
everyone be like Gordon and listen.
yeah, I listen intently.
Yeah. Well, okay, yeah. So that 3-part phrase is kind of the industry statement about different ways to do what we call authenticating.
Right.
And authenticating, when we give a password, we're authenticating. We're saying, I'm proving I'm Roy Huggins because I'm giving you Roy Huggins' password. And hopefully you can already see the problems with that scheme. Right. But the password is, in the classic jargon, it's something you know. And the other 2 things you could potentially use is something you have or something you are. And something you have was usually an object, like your smartphone is a great something that we almost all have. And so that becomes a useful item for authenticating, which is where we get the thing we call 2-factor authentication, where after you enter your password, the site you're getting into then also sends you like a text message with a code in it, and you got to enter that code. Right. And that works because only you have your phone.
Right.
And the something you are is that thumbprint or ret scan. Or Apple just announced that the iPhone X, iPhone 9, we're just going right to iPhone X, facial recognition. So you just look at your phone screen and it unlocks. I'd rather still have the thumbprint myself, but that's just me. It could just be that I'm old. I don't know.
Right.
But the great thing about the something you are, the biometric is the term, the something you are stuff on the iPhones or the Android phones, is that it means you can set a ridiculously strong password on your phone because you don't have to type it all the time. You only have to type it every couple of days.
Right.
And anytime you use your thumbprint or coming soon your face. But a bad guy would have to guess the 20-character alphanumeric character code that I have on my iPhone if they want to get into it.
Right.
And because iPhones are encrypted, the only way they can get to my data is to guess the passcode.
Yeah. Wow. So if someone were to be worried about, for example, there being a security breach or whatever, what steps should they take?
If they're worried that they've had one?
Yes.
Yeah, well, that starts with what's called a security incident. That's where we start it. And that's a good way to think about it because you want to remember that when you notice something has gone awry, what you're doing first is trying to determine, did we actually have a breach or did just something go awry or look like it went awry?
Right.
And so we call it an incident, and you take some time to investigate the incident. Now, the thing is, if it starts to look like you're pretty sure some clients were impacted by this incident, or even if you're not entirely sure, but it's pretty likely, you might want to go ahead and inform them about it soon. Right. And in fact, we just saw with Equifax how they lost the extremely deep information of like half of the adult population of the United States. They didn't do that. And that has turned out to be really bad.
Yes.
Like they took a couple months to tell us anything.
Wow.
And they're getting lambasted for that by the security community because that was not the right move.
Right.
So for you, do the right move.
Yeah.
If you think someone may have been impacted, go ahead and tell them that you think they may have been impacted, and you're going to let them know when you know more.
Yeah,
don't give them details until you know details, though.
Yeah, right? It's kind of the way I think about it. It's kind of like the duty to inform that we're all familiar with, and so I think that's the same thing goes for tech stuff. Well, Roy, I know one of the tools that you're a fan of, at least what I gather from hearing you and reading your stuff, is G Suite in Google.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
why is it you like that?
Well, I like, and I should point out that MS 365, Microsoft 365, is a competitor that is equally good. I just happen to use G Suite.
Yeah.
And the reason I talk about G Suite all the time is because so many of us use free Gmail and use the free Google tools all the time.
Right.
And so we're already used to them. And so that's actually why I specifically talk about G Suite, is because our people are already very accustomed to it.
Right.
But in fact, if you wanted to use Microsoft 365, it's just as valuable. So from there, I'll say, why are those things valuable?
Yes, that'd be great.
Right. The G Suite is a powerful set of tools that will do business associate agreements. And it's by a company that has a very strong security track record and also integrity track record. As much as we can be afraid of Google, and we probably should be, right, because they know everything. They've, their old motto of "Don't be evil." From a relative perspective, it's all relative. But from a relative perspective, they've actually done that pretty well. They've been a pretty good corporate citizen of the world, which is good, because as soon as they stop doing that, we're all in big trouble.
Right.
And that's, and I don't think that's necessarily where they're going. But so the company is very trusted when it comes to security. The business associate agreement is in place, and the tool is powerful. I mean, it gives you the ability to put your file somewhere, to have a team share information, to have an email service where it's legal for you to receive emails, and to keep client contacts, all this kind of stuff. It's a very, very useful thing to have. It doesn't do what we call secure messaging or secure email services the way something like Hushmail does.
Right.
But in a situation where a client wishes to exchange unsecured emails with you, G Suite is one of the options that you can legally use for that.
Right. Yeah, I think that's something I think is important to remember with folks. And I just, and I have it in my disclosure agreements with clients, just giving me permission to email with them. But I also specify in that disclosure agreement that I'm not going to talk about their case in the email.
Yeah,
we can talk about when we're changing our appointment time to, or, just, that sort of thing. But not to go into any detail there. And so I know there's another, you had mentioned early on the client that you had that wanted to text. What are some recommendations for texting that you tell people about?
Yeah. So texting, so up until kind of the last year or so, I would have talked about regarding texting the same way I do email. Except for the fact that phone companies, like the classic Ma Bell oriented phone companies, so AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, those guys, there's a strange atmosphere around HIPAA where you just don't really do business associate agreements with those guys.
Right.
You just get your services, and that's always confusing. When I ask experts about it, it's just sort of we just don't kind of thing, and it's partly because when you do a voice phone call, like just a normal, you pick up the phone and make a call, that actually is not covered by HIPAA's security rule. That explicitly is not. The law says so. For dumb reasons, but also practical ones. So we're going to go with it. But the rest of it is really, really stretching that, but that's just where we stand. And so that's where we get into one of the kind of harder to keep up with aspects of all this, which is that one thing about what is HIPAA compliant, one factor is actually just what kind of technology is available to us, right? Like if you're going to use the phone company texting that comes with your service, right? Is there a better alternative, right? Now, back when I had this client, there was not, right? That's what we had. And also that client had a flip phone. She didn't have a smartphone. So even if we did have the cool apps like we have now, she would not have been able to use them. So in her case, I would be like, okay, these are the risks involved. And she's like, trust me, I know the risks involved. I'm sure she did because she knows that phone really well. Right. And then I just, have her sign that we've talked about it and that she still wants us to text. And let me go ahead and do it. And And also, I'm with you. I only text about appointments, but with that client, I might actually even stretch that because she needs it, right? And available tech is only what works with her flip phone. And we actually have a loss of clinical benefit if we don't allow that, right? And that's a more kind of edge case. Although there may be some people listening to this for whom it's not an edge case at all. It's the basic case. But for most of us, it's an edge case. That kind of shows you the way you stretch this. But it all comes down to what the client wants and what the client can understand and what risks they can accept. And the one thing there is that with it being a phone company thing, we don't do the business associate agreements for which we're taking a liability risk. It's just at this point a small liability risk.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. But for the rest of us, what I do is I use Signal.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Okay. And I believe it's a free app, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an open source free app. Yeah, that's highly secure and super private. And in my analysis, qualifies as what Hipaa calls a conduit, which is why you don't need a business associate agreement. For that one, can you please put in the show notes a link to my review of Signal?
Yeah, sure will.
Because I need people to read that before they use it. You got to understand the things you got to do in order to make sure you don't lose important documentation.
Okay.
Because Signal is pretty prone to losing your messages.
Okay.
Not by design, but by just part of how it protects your stuff means that there's a number of circumstances in which you could just lose all your messages. Right.
Boy, Roy, we could go on for hours, I know, and you don't have hours and I don't have hours, but I'm hoping that we can get back together and talk some more about all this stuff. I'm just, I'm a bit of a tech geek myself. Right on. I always say though, I know just enough to be dangerous. So, So, again, folks, go over to Person-Centered Tech and look at Roy's stuff. It's a great, by the way, it's a great place to get some good continuing education stuff that's very useful.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thanks. Well, I hope you enjoyed getting to hear that episode with Roy. I'm thankful for his life and what he represented in our profession and the fact that he was such a caring person and really, truly wanted to help people. So, again, rest in peace, dear Roy. And, be sure and check out Person-Centered Tech. If you don't know about them, they do have some of the best resources around the tech side and HIPAA and all of that. And just, Roy lives on through that organization. And also go back, and I think you can still find them in your podcatchers, is the Therapy Tech with Rob and Roy. And so, or Roy and Rob. I can't remember how it goes. But again, you'll get to hear some more of just the spirit of Roy through those mediums. So again, I'm grateful for Roy and his life. Also, be sure and check out our sponsor, TherapyNotes. And you can find out more about them by going to practiceoftherapy.com/therapynotes. And also be sure and let me hear from you on the survey around what resources you're looking for. Again, I'm always looking for new stuff to do to really kind of help people out in our professions. And it's good to hear from you about what you're looking for and how we can kind of pull those things together. And also, before we cut out here, if you'll be sure and take time to follow us or subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to us. And that way, that just kind of boosts our ratings, but also leave us a review and a ranking. Again, that helps us boost our ratings. Last I looked, we are getting a little over 5,000 downloads a month, which is just blows my mind. So thank you for following me. Thank you for listening to the podcast, and looking forward to many more great episodes to come. You have been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the PsychCraft network of podcasts. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. And if you haven't done so already, please sign up to receive the free Private Practice Startup Guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.